Hello children, I hope you're all okay, and I hope you've been doing your home learning and lots of play as well, and you've been really good for mummy and daddy, and you've really tried to help around the home with all your chores. Well, I'm missing you terribly, and so is Mrs. Sandy and Mrs. Case and Miss Hanrahan and all the other teachers. We're all thinking of you, and I wanted desperately to finish Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH. So I'm going to read this to you, and if you like it, I'm going to read you some more books too. So you can let me know in your comments below. And I've got lots of little books from school that I can read, and hopefully if I can read, say, maybe 15-20 minutes a night, we should be able to have some good stories together. And you can see I've got my little audience over my shoulder there. They're all going to be listening as well. Now, we'd gotten up to page 133 in the Penguin edition of Mrs. Frisby and the Rats from NIMH. So if you wanted to read with me, with your own version of the book, if you have one, you can. And if you haven't, that doesn't matter either. Now, do you remember we were up to the point where Nicodemus was explaining to Mrs. Frisby how the rats escaped from NIMH, and they'd just been up all night. The rats had been up all night plotting to try to get out through the air ducts, those strange tunnels where the air conditioning weaves in and out of big buildings. So this is where we're up to, and now it's the next day, and Nicodemus is still narrating the story and thinking about what had happened. So here we go. The next day was terrible. I kept expecting to hear Dr. Schultz say, "Who took my screwdriver?" And then to hear Julie add, "My thread is missing too." That could have happened and set them to thinking, but it didn't. And that night, an hour after Julie, George and Dr. Schultz had left the laboratory, we were out of our cages and gathered, the whole group of us, before the mouse cabinet. Justin opened its doors, unlatched their cages, and the mice came out. They looked very small and frightened, but one strode bravely forward. "You are Nicodemus," he said to me. "I'm Jonathan. Thank you for taking us out with you." "We're not out yet," I said, "but you're welcome." We had no time for chatting. The light coming in the windows was turning grey. In less than an hour it would be dark, and we would need light to figure out how to open the screen at the end of the shaft. We went to the opening in the baseboard. "Justin," I said, "take the lead. Roll up the thread as you go. I'll bring up the rear. No noise. There's sure to be somebody awake somewhere in the building. We don't want them to hear us." I did not want to leave the thread where it might be found. The more I thought about it, the more I felt Dr. Schultz would try to track us down, for quite a few reasons. Justin lifted the grid, pushed open the sliding panel, and one by one we were through. As I watched the others go ahead of me, I noticed for the first time that one of the mice was white. Then I went in myself, closing the grid behind me and pushing the panel half shut again, its normal position. With Justin leading the way, we moved through the dark passage quickly and easily. In only 15 or 20 minutes we had reached the end of the thread. Then, as Justin had told us it would, the shaft widened. We could hear the whir of the machine ahead, and almost immediately we saw a square of grey daylight. We reached the end of the shaft, and there a terrible thing happened. Justin, you will recall, had told us that the machine, the pump that pulled the air through the shaft, had switched from low speed to high when he had first explored through there. So we were forewarned. The trouble was, the forewarning was no use at all, not so far as the mice were concerned. We were approaching the lighted square of the opening when the roar began. The blast of air came like a sudden whistling gale. It took my breath and flattened my ears against my head, and I closed my eyes instinctively. I was still in the rear, and when I opened my eyes again, I saw one of the mice sliding past me, clawing uselessly with his small nails at the smooth metal beneath him. Another followed him, and still another, as one by one they were blown backward into the dark maze of tunnels we had just left. I braced myself in the corner of the shaft and grabbed at one as he slid by. It was the white mouse. I caught him by one leg, pulled him around behind me and held on. Another blew face on into the rat ahead of me and stopped there. It was Jonathan, who had been near the lead. But the rest were lost. 6 in all. They were simply too light. They blew away like dead leaves, and we never saw them again. In another minute, the roar stopped. The rush of air slowed from a gale to a breeze, and we were able to go forward again. I said to the white mouse, "You'd better hold on to me. That might happen again." He looked at me in dismay. "But what about the others? 6 are lost. I've got to go back and look for them." Jonathan quickly joined him. "I'll go with you." Well, "No," I said. "That would be useless and foolish. You have no idea which shaft they were blown into, nor even if they all went the same way. And if you should find them, how would you find your way out again? And suppose the wind comes again? Then there would be 8 lost instead of 6. The wind did come again, 6 times more, while we worked with the screwdriver to pry open the screen. Each time we had to stop work and hang on. The 2 mice clung to the screen itself. Some of us braced ourselves behind them in case they should slip, and Justin, taking the thread with him as a guideline, went back to search for the other 6. He explored shaft after shaft to the end of the spool, calling softly as he went, but it was futile. To this day, we don't know what became of those 6 mice. They may have found their way out eventually, or they may have died in there. We left an opening in the screen for them, just in case. The screen. It was heavy wire with holes about the size of an acorn, and it was set in a steel frame. We pried and hammered at it with the screwdriver, but we could not move it. It was fastened on the outside. We couldn't see how. Finally, the white mouse had an idea. "Push the screwdriver through the wire near the bottom," he said, "and pry up." We did, and the wire bent a fraction of an inch. We did it again, prying down, then left, then right. The hole in the wire grew slowly bigger until the white mouse said, I think that's enough." He climbed to the small opening, and by squirming and twisting, he got through. Jonathan followed him. They both fell out of sight, but in a minute, Jonathan's head came back in view on the outside. "It's a sliding bolt," he said. "We're working on it." Inside, we could hear the faint rasping as the 2 mice tugged on the bolt handle, working it back. And then the crack at the base of the screen widened. We pushed it open, and we were standing on the roof of NIMH, free. Okay, so we're on to chapter 1. Well, I don't know the name of the chapter, but it's page 138. I'll show you this. I'll try and take a picture of that. It's called The Boniface Estate. Mrs. Frisby said, "Jonathan and Mr. Ages got the screen open?" "Yes," Nicodemus said, "and without them, I doubt we could have done it. The steel frame was strong, and the bolt was secure, and the wire so stiff we could not have bent it enough for one of us to get through. So we were glad that they were there with us and asked them if they would, after all, like to stay with us. Since there were only 2 of them, they said they would, for the time being at least. And now began a journey that was to last, with some interruptions, for almost 2 years. Parts of it were pleasant. It was a joyful feeling at first, just to be free again and to get those laboratory collars off. And parts of it were terrible. I have made notes about all of it, and the time, if the time ever comes when the rats publish books of their own, I intend to write a book about it. It would be a long book, full of trouble and danger, too much to tell now. It was in one of the dangerous times that I lost my eye. and got the scar that you can see on my face today. But we did have some happy times and some pieces of great good luck, two in particular that helped to explain how we got here and what our plans are now. It was early summer when we got out. We had known that beforehand. We could tell by the lateness of the light through the windows, though it was dark when we finally stood on the roof. We had no trouble getting down the side of the building, however. There were downspouts in the corners with plenty of toe holes. We dropped the screwdriver and spool of thread into one of these. A little lower there was ivy. We were all good climbers and there was a moonlight sky to see by. In less than 15 minutes we were on the ground. Staying in the darkest shadows under the bushes where we could, we sped away from NIMH, not knowing or caring at first what direction we were going. Nobody saw us. During the next few weeks we lived as we could. We had, in a way, to learn all over again how to get along. For although the world outside the laboratory was the same, we ourselves were different. We were a couple of times reduced to eating from dumps and garbage cans, but knowing how to read, we quickly learned to recognise signs on buildings. Groceries, supermarket, meats and vegetables, for instance. They let us know that there was food inside for the taking. And once inside a supermarket at night, they always leave a few lights on, we could even read the signs on the wall directing us to Section 8 for dairy products, cheese, Section 3 for baked goods, and so on. In the country there were barns and silos stocked with grain and corn and chicken houses full of eggs. Occasionally we came upon other rats and a few times we talked with them, but not for long, because after just a few words they would begin to look at us strangely and edge away. Somehow they could tell that we were different. I think we even looked different. Either the diet or the injections at NIMH had made us bigger and stronger than other rats, and all the strange rats we saw looked to us surprisingly weak and puny. So we were set apart from even our own kind. It was while we were in the country that we had our first important stroke of luck. We had just decided, after nearly 4 months of freedom and constant roving, to find a place to settle down, if not permanently, at least for the winter. We thought that it should be in the country, but not too far from a town, so that we would have access to grocery stores as well as barns and gardens. It was about this time too that I began to wonder and worry somewhat about the fact that whatever we ate, whatever we needed, must always be stolen. Rats had always lived that way, and yet, why? I talked to some of the others about this. It was the beginning of a discontent and an idea that kept growing, although slowly. The season was autumn. We were walking one evening down a winding country road. We never walked really on the road, but along the edge so that we could vanish into the bushes or a ditch if anyone came along. You can imagine that 20 rats and 2 mice travelling in procession would cause some comment, and we did not want that. As we walked, we reached a very high fence of wrought iron, the kind that looks like a row of black iron spears fastened together with pointed tops. An expensive fence surrounding a large estate with a big, expensive-looking house in the middle and well-kept grounds and garden. We walked along past this fence until we reached a gate. "There's nobody living in there," said Justin. "How do you know?" "The gate's padlocked, and look, dead weeds standing outside it, not even bent. Nobody's driven in here for a while." The house had a quiet, deserted look. There was a letterbox in front, hanging open, empty. "I wonder if we could get in," Jenna said. "Why should we? It's a big place. It would have a big pantry, big cupboard, big freezer, if it's as empty as it looks." We turned into the grounds, moving cautiously, and from beneath some bushes we watched the windows. As dusk fell, lights came on in several of them, both upstairs and down. Jenna said, "That's supposed to make us think there's someone there." "Yes," said Justin, "but there isn't. I could see one of the lamps when it came on. There was nobody near it. and they all came on at the same time. "Automatic switches to keep the burglars away," said Jenna. "Well, they're not keeping me away," said Justin. He ran to the house, climbed to one of the windowsills, and looked in. He tried another, and then came back. "Nobody," he said. So we went in. We found a small window in the back with a cracked pane, knocked out one corner of the glass and climbed through. At first, we planned just to look for food. We found it too, enough to last us for a year or more. As Jenna had predicted, there was a big freezer, well stocked, bread, meat, vegetables, everything, and a whole room full of shelves covered with tin food. The tins baffled us at first, as they had in the grocery stores. We could read what was in them, but we couldn't get it out. Then Arthur found a machine on the kitchen counter. He read the instructions on the side of it. Slide tin, under cutter, press switch. We tried it. The tin turned slowly around in the machine, and when we pulled it out, the top had been cut free. I'll always remember what was in that first tin. Vegetable soup. Delicious. After we had eaten, we wandered around the house. It was a rich man's mansion with beautiful furniture and fine rugs and carpeting on the floor. There was a crystal chandelier in the dining room and a big stone fireplace in the living room. But the greatest treasure of all for us was in the study. This was a large rectangular room with walnut panelling, a walnut desk, leather chairs and walls lined to the ceiling with books, thousands of books, about every subject you could think of. There were shelves of paperbacks, there were encyclopedias, histories, novels, philosophies and textbooks of physics, chemistry, electrical engineering and others more than I can name. Luckily, there was even one of those small ladders on wheels they used in some libraries to get up to the top shelves. Well, we fell on those books with even more appetite than on the food, and in the end we moved into the house and stayed all winter. We could do that, it turned out, without much fear of discovery. We learned that from some newspaper cuttings I found on the desk in the study. They were about a wedding, and most of them showed pictures of a newly married couple leaving a house to begin their honeymoon. The groom was a Mr. Gordon Boniface, heir to the Gould Stetson fortune, and the house they were leaving was the house we were in. According to the clippings, they were going on a trip all the way around the world. They were coming back to the Boniface estate in May, and until then, it was our estate. Oh, there was a caretaker gardener who came 3 times a week, and once in a while he would check the house in a cursory sort of way. That is, he would unlock the front door, glance around to see that everything looked all right, and then lock it and leave. But he didn't live there. He lived in a small house down the road, and we were expecting him when he came. We had figured out, from the way the place was kept up, the lawns mowed, leaves raked, gardens weeded and watered, that there had to be someone working on it. So we posted a watch, saw him coming, and kept watching him all the time he was there. And we made sure, when he looked in the house, that everything did look all right. This involved a certain amount of work. We had to haul all our empty tin cans and other rubbish at night out into a hidden place in the woods quite far from the house. We cleaned up after ourselves carefully. We learned to use the water taps and the dusting cloths we found in the kitchen cupboard. If the caretaker had looked more closely, in fact, he would have seen that the kitchen counters were somewhat shinier than they should have been in an empty house. But he didn't. He never even noticed the small corner of glass missing from the back window. And all winter, far into the night, we read books and we practiced writing. Well, that's the end of that chapter. Next chapter is going to be the main hall on page 145, but I'll save that for tomorrow, and I'll try to read you a chapter every night at least. So there's a little lesson, isn't there? we read books far into the night, and we practiced writing. Well, that's something you could perhaps not forget about to do in the day. Well, good night, children. I hope you've enjoyed the story so far as much as I've enjoyed reading it. I'm thinking of you all, as are all the staff of St Winifred's. We will really miss you, but we'll see you again soon. Now, don't forget to say your prayers. Pray for Mummy and Daddy and your family, of course, but also all the people in the hospitals up and down the country who are making people better. So I think that's a really important prayer to make, isn't it? All right, okay. I'll see you again tomorrow night for another part of Mrs. Frisby. Okay, God bless. Good night.